בתועפות הרים לו, בידו מחקרי הארץ, בתועפות הרים לו, בידו מחקרי הארץ, בתועפות הרים לו. נקד בפניו בתודה, בזמירות נריע לו, כי אל גדול אדוני. נקד בפניו בתודה, בזמירות נריע לו, כי אל גדול אדוני. עוד תשאירו איתנו. לא היום והוא עשהו, ויבשת ידיו יצרו. לא היום והוא עשהו, ויבשת ידיו ויבשת ידיו יצרו. לא היום והוא עשהו, ויבשת ידיו יצרו. נגד בפניו בתודה, בזמירות נריע לו, כי אל גדול אדוני. נגד בפניו בתודה, בזמירות נריע לו, כי אל גדול אדוני. השתחווה ונכרע, נברכה לפניו עושנו. 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 נקד בפניו בתודה, בזמירות נריע לו, כי אל גדול אדוני. נקד בפניו בתודה, בזמירות נריע לו, כי אל גדול אדוני. נקד בפניו בתודה, בזמירות נריע לו, כי אל גדול אדוני. נקד בפניו בתודה, בזמירות נריע לו, כי אל גדול אדוני. כי אל גדול אדוני. כי אל גדול אדוני. כי אל גדול אדוני. כי אל גדול אדוני.
Shema Yisrael, Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Echad. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Vaed.
Jesus made it easy. Don't judge people. Done. But I know Trisha wants more. She always wants more. This first thing I think of when I see no judging, it makes you think of courts. And then there's the judicial courts and the church courts and all that. And he's not talking about any of that. Because that's pretty simple. You have to have courts to have justice. So I'm thinking, what was Jesus talking about? And we expanded into what people heard in his day. First, he didn't speak in Greek, but the gospel is written in Greek, so I have to use those words. But the very first two words of the verse 1 is not judge. Let me explain what that means very quickly. In Greek, there are two participles you can use when asking a question. The first one, which would be not, means that the answer to the question is a negative. And then there's the other participle that's a yes, meaning I'm looking for a positive answer to the question. So this actually is a negative statement. No judging. And it's a question that is being asked of people. And then I thought about it, and I went, wait a minute now. He says, don't judge others because you're going to be judged. Well, that's easy. I'm done. But then he gives more, like 2 more examples. And you start to wonder, are we really that stupid? Or is there more going on here than just don't judge? And there actually is quite a bit. He's talking about people's habits and weaknesses and actions. That we shouldn't judge people by what they do or how they do it or habits that they may have. Because all of that we've been reading about, 5, 6, 7, it's going to go on for a couple more chapters. When you get down to the heart of it, it's all about community. And when the community comes together, now remember after Jesus and the church starts, these people start living in what we call communes today, right? They started living in small communities. And if you can't get over somebody's bad habit, I don't care what it is, unless it's against the Bible, right? We're talking about things like biting nails, picking, things like that. That really gross stuff.
Smoking.
Okay, smoking is a good one. You can destroy a community by judging people. By saying, Barb, stop biting your nails. You could actually destroy a community that way. And you're going to live together, and you're going to work together, and you're going to pray together and worship together. You got to learn to overlook things. I can say this now, even in marriage, right? There are certain habits, I won't mention, that one has to overlook. Or she'll drive you crazy, right? But then you hear women. How many times I do this with weddings, and you hear these women say, I'm going to change him. Newsflash, Barb, not gonna. Yeah, you might change a little bit, but you can't change. You can't be guaranteed to change everything. So if you're going to marry this guy and you don't like the way he eats his soup and you can't get over it, maybe you don't want to get married.
I'm feeding soup.
Well, one of them I actually heard was, when we got married and had kids, he won't drink as much. And here it was 12 years later, 2 kids, and I said, so how's that working out for you? No, you can't count on it. And we need to understand that. All this stuff we've been looking at, again, if you think of the heart of it, it's about how to keep a community together. Doesn't matter how big or how small it is. Everybody has shortcomings, except Jesus. We all have shortcomings. We all do things that annoy people. Well, doesn't matter what it is. You either get over it or go find another community to live in. But you don't destroy the community. And that also could be, if you want, you can add opinions and ideas and the whole bit. Because when I look on the outside of the church, what we've learned outside is we don't tolerate each other anymore. I have a different opinion than you on a topic. We don't tolerate having different opinions. But Jesus is saying, you don't learn to tolerate, you're not going to have community. And nothing was more important to him than community. Therefore, no gossip. Do you know there's gossip in church? Did you know that? We call them up north parking lot meetings. You have this big ad board meeting, right? And then you go out into the parking lot. And then you see the little groups. I don't like what you think. And then all the little gossip things start. And if you want to, you could try this. Now, you could start in these smaller churches. You can make up a little rumor. and see about an hour later what that rumor has turned into. And it can be really good fake news too, and it works. The other thing is criticism. By the way, there's no such thing as constructive criticism. Got that? It's destructive. Period, end of story. There is no such thing as constructive criticism. Criticism is criticism. It's always going to be negative. It's always going to be taken personally, and it's going to break up your community. I've seen churches break up over that. One of them because one group believed, this is going back to the 40s, that you could play softball in the afternoon on Sunday, and the other group said, you can't. And they criticized each other for it. And what ends up happening? In 41, they split. And we were at this church in like 1999, and people still remembered it. Oh, we don't want to have another split. When was the split, Barb? 1942, are you kidding me? And people remember. Over what? It was ridiculous. But it does destroy communities. And that's what we're talking about. There should be no gossip. When I was in Dillsburg, I actually threatened to put hidden microphones, wireless, in the parking lot because I could get more information by what was going on out there than I could in meetings. And you had people agreeing to things. Imagine it as Greg, a trustee, David, and you guys agree to something, and then two of you walk out and say, nah, we're not going to do that, we're going to do something else. And if you want to destroy community, that's the first way to do it. And it's wrong. And that's what he's talking about here. That's the main purpose. Now, when you read the scripture, I thought I'd explain a couple things, because Jesus then talks about getting back what measure you give to people and what that actually meant. And it has to do with the culture of his day. What he talks about, and his examples, I should say, are all about his day. And you have to think about what was going on in his day to understand it. So, of course, when he spoke these words, the people of his day understood it. So first, merchants did not have precise measuring tools. They didn't have good scales. Nobody did. Do you remember? Well, the kids in the back room, but us older people, do you remember when you had a scale that you could actually adjust with a little dial because it was a spring? You probably don't know about that. You used to be able to adjust it. So when the diet wasn't working real well, you know what I would do? I'd go in there and say, -5. Oh, that's a good place to start. Or if you wanted your spouse to go on a diet, turn it up a little bit. Because she's not looking when she steps on the scale, right? Have you ever done that? No. Because they won't look down at the scale, so you set it for like 7. Oh my gosh! Never did that? Yeah, you did it. Oh, Barb's a thing you don't have to worry about.
Put my foot on the back of the scale when she's standing on it.
That's a good one. But they didn't have precise measuring tools. So how did they measure things? And the first one is cloth, which I think is a really good one. Except Matt's disappeared on me. I needed him here. Matt's got pretty long arms. Who else has really long arms? I don't think Penelope does. Okay, we'll use Pappy as an example. So he and I would get together. We're going to be cloth merchants. And I happen to have a shorter arm than his because they measure distance from the elbow to the fingertip. That's a cubit, if you ever see that word. And that's why if you look in the Bible and say, how big was Noah's Ark? It's going to give you a range because it depends. Now, I have the shorter arm. He has the longer arm. So Pappy would go buy material. Let's say he's going to David, and he's going to buy by the cubit. So you're using your arm, and you're going to get a lot of cloth. But when he gives it to me, and I'm in the marketplace, and Barb comes to me and says, I'm going to make a dress. I want some cloth. I want to use mine because it's shorter. See, that's what it means. You're going to get back by your measure, meaning how long your arm is. Now he comes back. Where were you? We needed you. See, he's got gorilla arms. He'd been perfect for it. So I would take Matt and take him and let him buy all the cloth he can because his arm is just huge. So you get back by what you give. That's what he's referring to. But also, I thought was interesting, well, what happens with dry goods? You know, you bought wheat in the marketplace. How can you measure wheat when you don't have a scale. So what they did is they built a thing called a measuring box. Basically, it could be a square, it could be a rectangle, and it would have so much width on the wood, flat bottom of wood, and what the merchant would do is would basically fill up your measuring box, or his measuring box. So obviously, if I'm buying, I want to have big tall walls, but if I'm selling, I want really short walls. But what they did was they would put the dry goods, like the grain, into the measuring box, and then they squish it a little bit, and then they would push it down with their hands and press it down. Now, you, of course, as the buyer, would want to see some elbow grease in there. I, as the seller, and then I'll pour some more on and shake it a little bit and pat it down. And they kept doing this until it would overflow slightly. It had to overflow, measure for measure. So you can imagine that I might have a small measuring box, and Bill over here, my competition, might have a little bigger one. Who are you going to go to? The guy who's going to give you more because his measuring box is bigger. But the interesting thing about it, it has to spill over and be considered full. But how about liquids like milk and oil, which you would get at the market? People would bring their own containers. Because pretty much everyone used the same size. You didn't have a factory putting these things out. But when your liquid container was filled, it had to start to overflow to be considered full. That's how they measured things in Jesus' day, which hopefully will help you to understand the scripture a little bit. Now, I'll apologize about this slide because I should have separated it. Verse 3 to 5, it says, don't talk about the splinter in the other guy's eye when you got the log or the plank coming out of yours. In Semitic storytelling, they use exaggeration. So if you didn't get it from don't judge others, and you didn't get it from don't judge others because they're with the measure, guess what? I'm going to say it a third time. You know, we say that now. Say it 3 times. Yeah. Well, at least Jesus said it 3 different ways at the same time. But this time, you're going to get, your ears are going to wake up and go, what did he just say? A log in my eye. It's an exaggeration. Semitic storytelling was always exaggeration. So if I went out to the Galilee with Bill and I got a fish, my fish might only be, like 3, 4 inches long. By the time we got home, that sucker was 3 or 4 feet. And Bill's there saying, yeah, it was. No, it was 3 inches. But and you see that.
It was that big.
It was as big as a cubit. My fish grew to be as big as Matt's cubit, because his cubit's bigger than my cubit.
And Bill Cosby,
That's an arm length, by the way, elbow to, yeah.
and Bill Cosby will tell you about a cubit.
What's that?
Bill Cosby will tell you about a cubit.
Yeah, I don't think we should bring that up here. Well, that's going on. But you see, when you read stories, a lot of times you have stories in the scripture that are exaggerations. And the people did that all the time. It was to catch your ear to the person who's talking to the person next to them and not listening. And all of a sudden they go, did he just say a log in my eye? How can you be that? That's what it was all about. Now, verse 6, which I'm sorry is not on a separate slide, because it is different, but it's connected at the same time, says that we should not throw anything sacred to dogs and pigs. First, dogs. Dogs in the Middle East then, not as much today because it's more modern, were despised animals. People didn't exactly have dogs as pets, like you brought them in your house at night and you fed them. No, they just lived outside. And when we were in Mexico, we saw what pretty much the Middle East looked like, because people just let the dogs run wild. Which meant that if you had garbage to put out, guess where the dogs are going to be? Because you're not feeding the dogs. They got to get food somewhere. So they would ravage whatever they could. Even when we had little BJ was a good little dog. If you put the bag of groceries on the floor and he could smell anything, forget it. He could tear open a box of cereal within about 3 seconds. That's what they do. They go and they tear whatever. But now you've got wild dogs running around. And these dogs are hungry, so they're going to tear into things. And they're going to tear you apart. But you don't throw sacred words to them, which I'm going to tell you what that idiom means in a second. And then he repeats it by saying, not even pigs. Pigs were an abomination because the law said you can't eat pigs. They didn't have bacon back then. I'd be lost. So I didn't mean that. It was the Greeks and the Romans who brought pigs in. Greeks loved to eat pigs. Romans liked to eat pigs. They were very cheap, easy to raise, stupid animals, made a lot of bacon. That's fine. But then it said, don't throw your pearls. That one kind of caught me. I'm like, pearls? I don't have pearls. You have pearls? You probably do. The young ones probably haven't gotten pearls yet. You don't throw pearls. If you throw the pearls right in front of the pigs, pigs are stupid, they're going to trample it. It even says that in the verse. So what could this mean? Well, they had this other little idiom that we use today. You've heard of it. Pearls of wisdom. What are pearls of wisdom? It's speech, right? What this verse is saying is, and Jesus is saying this, do not get into a religious or a philosophical argument with unlearned people. Unlearned people, pigs and dogs. Metaphor for them. Because if you get involved in a discussion about theology and philosophy with someone who is not learned, then you could end up in a fight with them, which is very easy to do. And it turns out, in his day, in his culture, wise men, rabbis who knew, would not talk to the common people about what the scripture meant or how they should live. They just didn't do that. They would engage in conversation with other wise men, other rabbis, other teachers, to exchange ideas and to debate about the scripture. But you never would have seen them debating with someone who wasn't trained, someone who wasn't educated. That's just something you didn't do. And Jesus is telling us, don't do it, because all you're going to do is get into an argument about it. And it could lead to a fight. See, again, here's the connection. Breakdown of the community. Instead, take the unlearned person and teach them the ways of God. Then have the conversation with them. If you've ever talked to someone who is an agnostic, who says there is no God, you could start saying, well, this, and then you know what they're going to do. They're going to tell you how wrong you are, and before you know it, agnostic wants to punch you in the face. Jesus is saying, don't do it. It's not worth it. And if it's inside the community, think about inside the community for a moment, because we're going to have new people come in, right? And they don't know the ways of God. They don't know the Bible. They don't understand all. And you can't engage in a heavy-duty conversation about the theology of Jesus on the cross until they're trained, until they understand. Because all it's going to do is break down community. Everything that he's talking about in these chapters are going to revolve around that. Interesting enough, the church used this verse in a very interesting way. The Didache was considered the Christian manual, the very, very first one, written around 90 CE by a man named Hippolytus, who became one of the first bishops. And this was a manual how to live as a Christian. And you can see chapter 9, verse 5. But let none eat or drink of your Eucharist, that's communion, except those who have been baptized in the Lord's name. For concerning this also did the Lord say, give not that which is holy to the dogs. That's the verse they're talking about. In the early church, until you were baptized, you were not allowed to come to the communion table. You were not educated. You spent 3 years learning about Christianity, learning about Jesus. And after 3 years, you could be baptized. Then you could partake in communion. Luckily, we don't follow that in the United Methodist Church. Our theology says that this is an open table for anyone who wants to come, and if you are not baptized, come anyway, because you can experience God's grace, which is available, we call it prevenient grace, to you. So come to the table and enjoy. But if you go into some Catholic churches, some Brethren churches, Amish churches, you will not be allowed to come to the Eucharist. And they're holding on to this verse, and that's where it came from. So you don't give the sacred to those who don't know. So if you put it all together and say, wow, it seems so simple and it's now so complicated, it really isn't. Don't initiate or spread gossip. Big surprise, it happens in church. I'm not sure it happens here that much anymore. If your numbers drop, your gossip tends to disappear. Bigger churches we've been at, oh my gosh, if you wrote all the gossip down, I could write a book. It's unbelievable. And you shouldn't be doing that. Learn to overlook another person's habits and ways. So when we go and serve, excuse me, up in York and Compassion York, I'm not really upset that Pappy likes to use his left hand to dole out the soup, because he always splashes me. I just put up with it. No, he doesn't, but it's a good example. Learn to look the other way. Yeah, there are some habits that you wish people would get rid of. Smoking was a good one. You got rid of smoking, didn't you?
No, my wife did.
Your wife? Oh, she did. Excellent.
10 years ago.
But you know what? If you don't look the other way, then you will not have community. It's going to break down. And then what are you going to do? So maintaining community. But then as I thought about this during the week, we're going to run into the golden rule. Everyone knows it. Do unto others before they do unto you. Do unto others as they would do unto you. That's the golden rule. So it's coming up here pretty quick. But you can almost see that as a conclusion for this gigantic section. Because the golden rule is set up to what? To keep community. And yes, there'll be arguments, and yes, we'll do this and that and whatever. But if we're following Jesus' words, the idea is to keep community together, to keep the group together. And that's what we have to remember. Oh, I already said that.
אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא את נעשה בחפצו כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי כפלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארה אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יוציא נברא לעת נשא בחפצו כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי כפלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארה אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יוציא נברא לעת נשא בחפצו כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי כפלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא הווה בתפארה והוא היה והוא הווה בתפארה אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא את נעשה בחפצו כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי כפלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארה אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נשא בחפצו כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי כפלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארה. אדון עולם אשר מלך בקרב כל יצרים בלילה, נתן בחסד כל הזין מלך שמו נקרא, והארץ יפלוט הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא, והוא היה והוא הופך בתפארה, והוא היה והוא הופך בתפארה. אשר מלך בקרב כל יציר נברא לעת נתן בחסד כל הזין